What's a dead giveaway that someone has come from poverty? My dad never ate when Mom and I did. He'd sit at the table with us, but he always had stomach trouble that didn't seem to clear up until we had finished our meals. Then, if there was food left, he'd say, well, I guess I should try to eat something. If there wasn't anything left, he'd say that he just didn't feel like his stomach could handle anything. I didn't realize until I was an adult that he was waiting to be sure that my mom and I had enough to eat before feeding himself, and that he went to bed hungry on more than one occasion. It didn't occur to me what he was doing because his mother, younger sister, and younger brother confirmed that he'd done this since he was around 10. He went hungry as a kid to make sure that they didn't. Nowadays, even the simplest meal at his house looks like a Thanksgiving feast for an army. But he always fills his plate last and never takes a second helping until everyone else is finished.
That's a pretty touching story. It's interesting to see how our parents can take on certain habits from their past. His way of making sure everyone else eats first shows a lot about his character. It's like that's his way of caring. You also notice how these traits stick with us as we grow older. It's a simple yet profound reminder of selflessness.
I grew up poor and am still poor, and so did my so. A few weeks ago, our car broke down right as we got somewhere to go out with friends. It was painfully obvious who in the group grew up with money. The kids with money were really nonchalant about it. They were like, are you still coming out drinking tonight? The people who grew up poor jumped in to help. Did you try X, Y, Z? Hey, I have AAA now, so I can help with a tow. I'll drive you home. Do you guys have food at the house, or do you need to stop at the store? Because they knew that an unexpected expense that makes it so you might not be able to get to work is devastating, and that your priorities just change from having a night out to survive. Really quick.
That's a relatable story. It's interesting how different backgrounds shape reactions in tough situations. When people have been through financial struggles, they seem to understand the impact of those unexpected problems. It's nice that your friends pitched in. Sometimes, those moments really highlight who's got your back. It shows the value of real support over just having money. Those bonds can mean a lot more in the long run.
Being okay with inconveniences. Waiting for the bus in the rain for 20 minutes? Done that before. Sleeping on the floor, on top of a blanket? No problem, it straightens out the back. Eating rice with beans? Better than just rice and soy sauce. Sitting next to a fat person on a plane? Holy shit, flying.
I remember one time I had a long wait for a bus in the rain. It wasn't great, but I made it work. I ended up chatting with an old man who told me stories from his youth. It turned a hassle into a decent moment. Sometimes, those little annoyances can lead to unexpected experiences. It's all about how you look at it.
I grew up very poor and learned to not care what I ate so long as I eat. Now I'm retired, but made good money as an engineer. Still, I don't really care what I eat so long as I eat. McDonald's hamburger or a steak. Either is fine, and I'm just as happy with either one. On the other hand, though, I have to watch myself as I tend to hoard canned food items. Spam, corn, green beans, canned fish, crackers. I currently have close to 40 pounds of flour and 50 pounds of rice, along with 25 pounds of sugar, just in case. Those airtight screw-top dog food storage containers are great. Still, while I understand it's from a sense of food insecurity as a kid, here, I'm 61 years old and still have to watch how I act based on those long-ago scares.
It's interesting how childhood experiences shape adult habits. Growing up with little can really change your perspective on food. Now, even with more resources, the instinct to stock up remains. I know someone who still buys extra pasta and rice, just in case. It's like a safety net, even if it's not needed. Sometimes, those old mindsets linger a long time, no matter how comfortable life gets.
We had a pizza and hot dog party in class one day in JR High. After all the pizza and actual hot dogs were gone, all that was left was bread plus condiments. I made myself a ketchup and mayo sandwich like it was NBD, and a kid from the back of the class said, "That's how you know when someone grew up poor, white bread and ketchup." Honestly, I hated the hot dogs my mom bought when we were kids, so I ate the hot dog sandwiches without the actual meat. But yeah, we could only afford the cheap hot dogs, but I didn't really understand most of this till I was an adult.
That pizza and hot dog party reminds me of how food can shape experiences. I had a similar deal in junior high. Everyone devoured the pizza, and then there were just random spreads left. I made a weird mix too. It's funny how those memories connect to what we had growing up. It's like, you don't realize the details until later. But hey, weird food combos sometimes taste good.
I grew up in Latin America, and even though I was not poor, I had friends that were poor. The dead giveaway would be that on New Year's Eve, when all the children are playing with fireworks, my childhood friend said he had to go home because he had to go to work that night. He was 6. Edit, dead for death. Edit 2. My friend's name was Tico, which is short for Robertico, and we grew up in Peru. Another anecdote about him was that my mom noticed that he would always come to play at around lunchtime. He would whistle outside of the house, that was, or call for "let's go play," and bang on the door like all the kids. My mom would eventually open the door, and ask if he would like to have lunch with us, to which he would always accept, saying thank you 100 times. Now that I think about it, I would feel jealous of the attention he would get from my mom and tall back to my mom, to which he would say, "Don't talk to your mom like that, because you only get one mom in your life."
I had a friend named Tico growing up in Peru. He wasn't poor, but his family struggled. I remember one New Year's Eve, while we were playing with fireworks, he had to go home to work. He was only 6. It was a strange moment. My mom always invited him to lunch, and he'd thank her repeatedly. I was a bit jealous of their bond. He reminded me to appreciate my mom, though. Simple lessons stick.
My attitude toward money is a big one. If I have some money, I'm uncomfortable. If I spend money on myself, getting or doing unnecessary / frivolous / fun things, I'm uncomfortable. If I can spend money to give someone something nice, I'm happy. If someone else spends money to give me something nice, I'm mortified.
I get that feeling. Money can really create a weird vibe. It's like, when you have it, it brings a sense of guilt. Spending on yourself feels wrong, but if it's for someone else, it's a whole different story. I've been in situations where someone tries to treat me, and I just feel awkward about it. It's tough trying to balance wanting to treat yourself and being generous with others.
I knew this kid that never had school supplies. So I told my mom, and we got him a 24-pack of crayons, and I snuck them into his desk. He cried when he found them. Couldn't believe that he had brand new crayons with his actual name written on the box. I will never forget you, Brett. Edit, spelling and grammar edit too. Thank you for the gold. As for my mother, she's overwhelmed by the responses, and so am I. She's the most amazing mother in the entire world. She's raised 4 children with my dad and is the grandmother of 2. I couldn't ask for a better role model in my life. I love my mother to pieces, and I thank you all for the kind words. Good vibes to all. You are truly amazing, everyone.
It's cool how small gestures can stick with you. I remember helping a friend who was struggling, just like you did for Brett. We pulled together some stuff he needed for school, and his face lit up when he got it. Those moments matter more than we realize. It's nice to see kindness can make such a difference in someone's day. Just a reminder to look out for each other.
Never letting food go to waste, even if they're full. I remember a moment with my friend group in high school during lunch where our class differences really came out. My best friend and I grew up poor lower class, but the rest of the group grew up upper middle to upper class. One of my friends didn't want his milk and asked each person if they wanted it. Everyone said no, so he said, "Well, I'll just throw it away then." And my best friend and I leapt up and yelled simultaneously, "No, I'll take it." They were all so confused and said if we wanted it, then why do we say no? They didn't understand it was because we couldn't bear to see food go to waste.
It's funny how different backgrounds shape our views. I had a similar experience in school. A friend was discarding his food, and my other friend and I couldn't let it happen. We jumped in to grab it, and our peers were baffled. For them, it was just food. For us, it felt like a chance to avoid waste. It's a small moment, but it showed how our values shaped our choices.
Reluctance to go to a doctor or dentist, even when they really need one, and even if they have health insurance. Or even more so, when someone else has to point that that's even an option. This happened to me recently. I had been having tooth pain that was getting steadily worse for a week. I was basically just toughing it out, taking ibuprofen and avoiding chewing on that side. When my boyfriend noticed the pained look while I was eating and asked what the problem was, I told him and he responded, "Well, did you make a dentist appointment?" It hadn't even occurred to me to do that, even though I've had insurance for a year now.
I get it. Sometimes you just avoid that stuff, thinking maybe it'll go away. I had a similar thing with a nagging back pain for weeks. I just dealt with it. Friends would ask, "Did you see a doctor?" And I'd shrug it off. It took my sister pointing out I had insurance before I finally made an appointment. It's funny how we let things slide until someone else reminds us.
I spent the first couple years of my life living in shelters with my mom. Never came into any money during my childhood. Me and my girlfriend have now been together for almost 3 years. Her family is quite well off. I was with her last year, and she was having strawberries. I told her I had never tried one, and I ended up having one. They were all ones from Godiva covered in chocolate. Pretty lucky for that to have been my first. It turns out that I've never had about half of the food her family eats regularly. I grew up on up to 2 packs of ramen every day. Edit, to answer the question, the food we eat on a regular basis is one of the best indicators of our upbringing.
It's interesting how food can highlight our backgrounds. Growing up in a shelter, you miss out on a lot. Trying chocolate-covered strawberries was probably a whole experience. It's like a little glimpse into a different life. Makes you think about how much our upbringing shapes our tastes and what we find normal. Ramen every day is a strong contrast to what you're experiencing now. Glad you're seeing more variety.
I have enough money to buy what I want right now, but I will pain and ache over it for months, sometimes even years before buying it. I have to convince myself that I do indeed need it. I've already gone X month without it. Do I still need it? Or else I just never buy it. I will buy my girlfriend anything she wants without hesitation, but when it comes to purchasing things for myself, it almost never happens. In most cases, as soon as I buy something, a major life event happens, and I am just short by that exact amount. So I live in fear of being poor. Again.
That's pretty relatable. I get caught up in overthinking purchases too. I can drop cash on a friend's birthday gift without a second thought, but when it's for myself, I hesitate. It's like I need a solid reason to justify it, even if I have the funds. And yeah, the timing is always wild. Just when I finally buy something, life throws a curveball, and I start sweating about finances again.
Growing up in a middle-class family in Asia, I remember this poor family who used to work as maids in the neighborhood. Their kids would sometimes play ball with the rest of us kids, and one time we noticed that one of those kids was beaming with happiness. I asked him why, and he said that it was his birthday, so his mom was going to give him sliced bread and butter for dinner as a special meal. Sink that one in. Sliced bread and butter. He had only had it once before in his life, and nothing made him happier than being able to try it once again. It brought tears to my eyes, thinking how much we take for granted and how little some people have. I met this kid after 2 decades, and he graduated from college and had a nice job. Still the same humble guy. I still remember him whenever I feel things aren't going my way, that there are many who are happier and content with way less than what I have, and I should be grateful for it. And education is the best way to get out of the loop of poverty.
It's interesting how perspective shapes us. I had a similar experience growing up. There was this kid in my neighborhood, always smiling despite having very little. He mentioned one day that just having a simple meal made him happy. Years later, he became successful, but he stayed grounded. It really makes you think about what we value and how easy it is to overlook how fortunate we are. Gratitude can go a long way.
Using myself as an example, I was over at a friend's house for the first time a few years back. He told me that we were going out to eat soon at some restaurant, thinking he meant we, as in him and his family. I started to pack my things and got ready to leave. I got halfway out the door before I was stopped by his dad. He asked where I was going, so I told him I was going home because they were leaving for dinner soon. He chuckled at me and said I was invited to come with them. I told him I didn't have any money and couldn't go with them. With a confused look on his face, he said, "You're our guest. We wouldn't make you pay the entire car ride to Denny's." I was racking my brain, trying to think how this guy could afford to pay for my $10 lumberjack slam.
That's a classic mix-up. I remember when I went to a friend's place, and I thought it was just a hangout. He mentioned dinner, and I figured I wasn't invited. I was about to walk home when his dad stopped me and said it was cool to join. I felt awkward about the money, but they insisted. Turns out, it was just a chill family thing. Good food and a solid lesson about not assuming.
Waiting in horror every time you swipe your debit card, dreading a decline message on the card machine. Even on payday. Edit. Well, this blew the hell up. Thank you for the gilding, kind stranger. Also to the folks mentioning poor money management, that can be the case. But for me, I had my account hacked before and also had shitty luck with automatic withdrawals.
I get that. I've had moments where I swipe my card and just feel that anxiety creeping in. It's always a gamble, especially if unexpected fees hit right after payday. I've also dealt with some shady bank stuff before, so I understand the worry. It really puts you on edge even when you think you have everything sorted out. Just waiting for that moment when the machine gives you good news.
My dad went on the first date with my mom and her family and ordered shrimp. My grandfather, mom's dad, starting laughing and asked how the shrimp was. He said good, but a little crunchy. Everyone is now laughing, and my mom had to explain to him that the shrimp needed to be peeled. He grew up poor and never had shrimp before. They ended up getting married and taught me how to peel shrimp. I am very thankful I never had to endure crunchy shrimp.
That's a pretty relatable story. It's funny how something as simple as peeling shrimp can spark such a memorable moment. Your dad probably learned more than just how to eat shrimp that night. It's cool that your family has this shared experience, and it turned into a bonding moment. Good to know you've avoided the crunchy shrimp fate, though. Turns out, even the simplest things can make for great stories later on.
If they're well off now, a full fridge and pantry. People that grow up hungry never want to feel that way again. They never want their kids to know what true hunger feels like, so they pack the fridge to damn near overflowing. Also, having a variety of different foods and beverages available at any time is something poor families don't usually get to experience.
That's a solid perspective. It makes sense that growing up with hunger would shape how someone approaches food later in life. Wanting to ensure there's enough for yourself and for your kids is pretty relatable. It's interesting how those experiences influence choices, often leading to a very different relationship with food and security. Keeping that fridge stocked becomes a priority, a way to create a sense of safety and abundance.
A total lack of give a shit about losing something. As a teacher, I see this a lot. My school is nearly 90% free and reduced lunch, which means that the majority of my students deal with some level of poverty. From the general, we're a little short on lunch options, to the severe, we had to choose between electric and food this month. My students are often so used to having to pack up and leave a house in the middle of the night, or to losing something they enjoyed, that nothing is permanent. Nothing lasts. So when a paper gets misplaced, or they do the work but don't turn it in, they just kind of shrug. It's heartbreaking, really. I have a lot of, "What are you doing to change this pattern, and do you understand that I want to help?" type of conversations with them. 8th graders, by the way.
It's tough to see kids who deal with so much unpredictability. They just adapt to loss as part of life, which is kind of sad. I remember friends who had similar experiences. They didn't really get attached to things. It was like, if it's gone, it's gone. You try to help them understand that some things matter, but it's hard when their reality is so different. Just makes you think about what matters.
Grew up poor, was homeless a couple times as a kid. One thing I've noticed around friends and coworkers is that I'm way more naturally life-hacky than people who grew up middle class and above. Like, I have no problem using items for things other than their intended purpose, because obviously we had fewer items and had to make do.
That's interesting. Growing up in tough situations can really change how you see the world. It's like you develop a different set of skills just to get by. I guess when you have less, you tend to be more resourceful. I've seen that with friends too. Those who had it tougher often come up with unique solutions that others wouldn't even think of. It's a different kind of creativity, born out of necessity.
There's a bit of discussion about full pantries and depression kids here. My pop was 20 when the depression hit in 1929, and mom was 13. When I was a kid and old enough to be left alone when they went away for a weekend or etc., the only stuff I had to buy was bread and milk. There were 2 refrigerators with freezers and a stand-up freezer that were full. There was a refrigerator-sized cabinet and another cabinet of equal size full of dry food and canned goods. This was in the mid to late 1960s. I learned my prepping skills at home from childhood. On Christmas around 2002, my wife, daughter, and I were snowed in at their house. I just laughed when my wife was concerned about getting out for food. We had a delicious spaghetti and meatballs Christmas dinner with wine, dessert, and coffee. One of the best Christmas dinners ever.
That's a good reminder about self-sufficiency. Growing up with that kind of pantry definitely shapes how you view food and preparation. It's funny how being snowed in with plenty of food can turn into a positive memory, like that Christmas dinner. It's all about making the best of a situation. Learning those skills early really pays off later, for sure.
They smoke cigarettes down to the filter, or save but for later. Also clean shoes that are obviously old. A friend and I are both in our 40s and still obsessively clean our shoes, because in high school you only got new ones at the beginning of the year. It's funny how growing up poor fucks with you after you escape it and grow up. We couldn't afford to keep the house warm. I often slept fully clothed with a coat on. Now in the winter, I keep my home in the mid-70s. I own 2 of everything just in case I'm plunged back into poverty. 2 pairs of glasses, an extra vehicle, etc. When you grow up with 1 coat and no ability to replace if it gets stolen or ripped, it's a horrible feeling of helplessness when something goes wrong.
I get it. Growing up with not much can stick with you. My friend and I still have some odd habits from that time. We keep our stuff clean and in good shape, just in case. It's like a safety net. I remember those freezing nights, having to bundle up just to sleep. Now I try to keep my place warm and stocked up, so I don't have to feel that way again.
I didn't necessarily come from poverty, but moderate to extreme neglect. I used to eat meals on the floor if someone brought home leftovers when I was a young adult, not used to eating at a table. And when someone brought in an MRE in elementary school, I said, "Wow, they eat better than us." And everyone stared at me. I also never wear clothes twice and wash towel sheets very often because I almost never had clean clothes or linens as a child. It's good to be an adult.
That sounds tough. Growing up like that can shape how you see things. It's interesting how little habits stick with you, like never wearing clothes twice or wanting everything clean. It's a way of coping, I guess. Being an adult brings a bit of freedom, though. You get to choose how you live, and it sounds like you're making the most of it now.
They know dozens of ways to prepare potatoes. One of my most vivid childhood memories is of me and my sister coming home from school, freezing cold, digging in the dirt, looking for missed potatoes from the previous harvest. It always chokes me up when I think about it. Mom was single with shitty jobs. Ended up putting myself through architecture school and making sure my mother never wanted for anything again.
That's a pretty touching story. It shows how tough times can shape who we become. Just digging for those potatoes brings back memories of hard work and survival. It's cool that you were able to turn it all around and support your mom. It's nice to see people pushing through tough situations to create better lives. Family plays a big role in motivation.
I know I'm a little late to the show here, but my parents bartered a lot when I was a kid. If we needed car work done, my stepdad, who was good at plumbing and generally a handy person, went and did some work for the guy who was good with cars. The car guy would then come over and fix our car. Now that I am grown and work as a software developer, I always have the urge to offer my services up to a business anytime I am paying for something major. For example, my wife and I just had a paver patio put in our backyard, and it took everything I had not to offer to fix their lacking website in exchange for a discount on our patio.
It's interesting how those early experiences shape you. Growing up seeing your parents barter probably made you see value differently. It's like a skill that's embedded in you now. While working as a developer, it's natural to want to help out in that way. I get the temptation to offer a website fix for a discount. Just shows how your mind operates based on past lessons. It's all about finding that balance, I guess.
Franks and beans represent. Also, my coal miner grandfather had this thing he used to make me when I was little that he said was from when he was young. It was nothing more than bow tie noodles and cottage cheese heated in a pan. It was good, but looking back, it was a dish tailored for feeding a whole family on pennies.
That sounds pretty nostalgic. I can see how a simple dish like that would carry memories. It's interesting how certain meals connect us to people's pasts. Makes you appreciate the effort behind them, even if they seem basic. My family had a few budget meals too, and they always remind me of gatherings. Sometimes, simplicity can be more fulfilling than fancy food.
Not something you'll notice about someone, necessarily, but my mom came from pretty extreme poverty, and she, now 60, says she still has to fight the urge to take everything she sees at a buffet table. She also can't pass up free food and still coupon cuts like a pro. Some of that is just being a mom and being the person who always grocery shops in the family, but some of it comes from habits formed while hungry.
That's an interesting story. It shows how experiences shape our behaviors, even years later. I know people who grew up in similar situations and still have that mentality around food. There's a real survival instinct there. It's not just about saving money, it's about security. It makes sense that those habits stick with you, especially if you face real hardship. It's a reminder of how past struggles can influence our choices.
I remember talking with an older man who grew up in poverty with 2 siblings and his mom in Philadelphia. He said he still finds going to a movie theater to be such an amazing experience, because growing up, it was the one special thing that his mother was able to afford for the kids, which was going out to see a movie, and it only happened about once a year. He said back then, him and his 2 sisters never cared if the movie was good or not. They were just so excited to be going to the movies, and it was such a big treat for them. I think this was all in the 1950s or 60s, so tickets were 50 cents to $1.50 each during that time period.
That's an interesting story. It's a good reminder of how something simple, like going to the movies, can hold a lot of meaning. For him and his siblings, it was almost like a celebration, even if it was rare. It shows how experiences can be valued more than the actual entertainment. Nowadays, we often take those little pleasures for granted. His perspective makes you think about appreciating those moments more.
Just a few weeks ago, I was working a close shift with this young dude at a fast food place. Once the store is closed, we usually throw all the food out because it gets old and dry and not very nice to eat at all. But I remember the dude quietly came to me looking really embarrassed and asked if he could take the food home so his dad had some food for work. I assume his dad worked night shift. The truth is that food looked like dog food. It was dry and old and the type of food you wouldn't eat unless you had to. This kid was trying to help out his dad in any way he could, and it got me really teary-eyed. So I gave him all the food, plus we had a ton of old cakes from front counter that I bagged up and gave to him. I've never seen someone so happy over some old food before.
That's a decent story. It shows a lot about the kid's character. It's pretty cool that he was willing to take food home for his dad, even when it wasn't the best stuff. I mean, it was just old fast food, but to him, it probably meant a lot more. Glad you helped him out. Sometimes, small gestures can really make a difference for someone who's struggling.
My husband grew up poor. He does this exact same thing, even though we have plenty of food. He will say he had a big lunch or ate lunch late at work and not eat while our daughter and I are eating the dinner I prepared. After we have finished, he will eat a plate of food in the kitchen. I asked him about it a few years ago, and he said that's just what his dad always did. So he does it too, just in case there's not enough food to go around.
It's interesting how habits from childhood stick with us. Your husband seems to hold on to that scarcity mindset, likely just out of habit. Even when there's no need, those old patterns can be hard to shake. It's a good reminder of how our backgrounds shape our behaviors in ways we might not even realize. It's probably important to find a balance between those old habits and the present situation.
I never flew until I was married and then separated and had a young child. Now it's almost 20 years later, and in the past few years I've flown a few times a year, mostly just domestically, and it still amazes me. Takeoff, landing, hanging around the airport. I love all of it. I still don't like people quite enough to enjoy talking much to my neighbor, but I look forward to working or reading in flight.
It's interesting how experiences change over time. Not flying until marriage must have felt different. Now, with 20 years of flying under your belt, it's like a whole new world. Airports and flights can be enjoyable, especially when you can just relax and do your own thing. It's nice that you've found your space in the air, even if small talk isn't your thing.
Also, if there was a time or two with a little extra money, there would be Cool Whip containers along with the margarine containers in the cabinet. Those were the heartbreakers. I'd open the freezer and lose my mind because there was Cool Whip in there, only to discover that it had leftover pottage, brown rice and lentils baked together, in it.
I can relate to that. I used to think there was some ice cream in those containers, only to find old soup or something equally disappointing inside. It's funny how something so simple can set you up for a letdown. You get that moment of hope, then it just vanishes with one look inside. Life's little quirks, I guess.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.